I still remember that dinner like it's happening in slow motion. We were sitting around the kitchen table, plates half finished, the air thick with polite conversation. And then my stepmother smiled and said, almost casually, "Families share money." Something in me went very still. Later that night, my phone buzzed with a security alert from my bank. Unauthorized access attempt. My heart didn't race. It hardened. That's the difference. Fear makes you shaky. Clarity makes you cold. The next evening, I looked directly at my father across that same kitchen table and said the words I'd swallowed for years. If I hear another line from your wife about my money, there will be no more polite conversations. I will personally explain where she stands and why my money is not hers. The fridge hummed. Her coffee cup froze halfway to her lips. My father looked at me like I was a stranger. And in that moment, I realized something important. Families don't always break with shouting and slammed doors. Sometimes they erode slowly, one soft comment at a time. I learned that the hard way. When my mom died, I was 14. Cancer doesn't negotiate. One season she was here. The next I was standing in borrowed black shoes at her funeral being told how strong I was. I hated that word. Strong meant don't cry. Don't fall apart. Don't need anything. Less than a year later, my father introduced us to Margaret. She wasn't openly cruel. That would have been easier. She was polished. Warm. Always smiling. The kind of person who brings casseroles to neighbors and speaks in soft, measured tones. Everyone said my dad was lucky. I stayed quiet. That's what you do when you're young and grieving. You convince yourself that discomfort is just adjustment. Years later, when I left for military training, I hugged my father goodbye and told myself everything back home was stable. Margaret said, "We'll take care of everything. You just focus on your future." I needed to believe that. The military taught me discipline. It taught me to observe before reacting. It taught me that control isn't always loud. Sometimes it's systematic. That lesson would save me. The first comment about my money came during a video call in my 3rd year of service. Margaret smiled and said, "With your pay and bonuses, the family must feel secure." The way she said family lingered in my mind. After that, the remarks multiplied. Always framed as concern. Have you thought about long-term planning? Wouldn't it be easier if your father helped manage things? Money can be overwhelming. Here's something I've learned. When someone repeatedly offers to help with something you never asked for help with, pause. Ask yourself why. When I came home on leave, I noticed small changes. My mother's desk was gone. Important file cabinets had been organized. Documents had disappeared. Every time I asked, I got a smile and a dismissive wave. Don't worry about it. So, I started worrying. Then the bank alerts began. First an attempted login. Then inquiries about adding an authorized user. Someone had referenced my father's address. That's when I stopped being the polite daughter. I didn't scream. I documented. Dates. Times. Emails. Screenshots. I learned something powerful in the military. Emotions fade, records don't. And that principle applies far beyond combat or operations. It applies to life. Margaret grew bolder. At a family gathering, she laughed and told relatives, "We're lucky to have her military income in the household." I didn't look at her. I looked at my father. He smiled. That was the crack. Later I told him calmly, I set a boundary. She crossed it. He rubbed his forehead and said, "You don't understand how complicated things are." Complicated is often code, for I've already chosen comfort over confrontation. Another bank notification arrived. This time about beneficiary information. I didn't argue. I called the fraud department. I froze my credit. I opened new accounts. I rerouted deposits. I sought legal guidance. And let me pause here because this part matters. Protecting yourself isn't dramatic. It isn't paranoid. It's responsible, especially when it comes to finances. Money represents independence, security, future options. When someone tries to control that, they're not just reaching for numbers in a bank account, they're reaching for leverage. Eventually, I found the folder. Neatly labeled. Inside were spreadsheets outlining future consolidation. My income listed as projected collateral. There was even a handwritten note. She won't say no forever. I stood there holding those papers, and something shifted permanently inside me. Not rage. Not heartbreak. Recognition. I wasn't misreading the situation. I was finally seeing it clearly. So I prepared. Quietly. I let them believe their pressure was working. I mentioned feeling overwhelmed. Margaret leaned in immediately. Families share burdens, she said warmly. That's the thing about manipulation. It often dresses itself as unity. I scheduled a formal meeting. Neutral ground. Mediator. Attorney. Documentation. At dinner with extended family, when Margaret once again hinted at formalizing things, I calmly said I had already secured my accounts and opened a fraud file. The table went silent. Later, in a glass-walled office, everything was laid out in order. Attempted access. Draft applications. Written plans involving my income. When asked what outcome I wanted, I said clearly, full acknowledgement that my finances were mine alone. No access. No inquiries. No representation of my income. Signed documentation. And here's something I've reflected on many times since. Boundaries are not threats. They're clarity. They don't attack. They define. Margaret asked, and if we don't agree? I answered evenly. Then the fraud file moves forward. My father signed first. She followed. I didn't feel victorious walking out of that office. I felt finished. There's a difference. The silence afterward was clean. Not bitter. Not tense. Just empty of pressure. Months later, my father left a voicemail. I should have protected you. I'm sorry. I listened to it 3 times. Then I archived it. Forgiveness and reconciliation are not the same thing. That's another lesson I had to learn. I visited my mother's grave and told her. I handled it. I didn't let them take what wasn't theirs. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was waiting for permission to breathe. Here's the deeper truth in all of this. Family is not defined by access. Not to your home. Not to your time. And definitely not to your finances. Family is defined by care and respect. When those disappear, the title alone doesn't justify control. And I want you to think about this in your own life. Where are you being polite at the expense of your boundaries? Where are you mistaking silence for peace? Because sometimes peace is just unpaid emotional debt. Total resolution of the story. I didn't win against someone. I reclaimed ownership of my life. I learned that discipline isn't just about external strength. It's about internal clarity. I learned that being called cold or difficult sometimes just means you've stopped being easy to use. And most importantly, I learned that real love doesn't require access to your assets to prove it exists. If my story made you think, or if you've ever had to draw a line that scared you, I'd love to hear your experience. Hit that like button if this resonated, subscribe for more deep dives into real-life lessons like this, and tell me in the comments.